The radio crackled with static at Forward Operating Base Viper, somewhere in the dust-choked mountains of eastern Afghanistan. General Marcus Webb stood in the operations center, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays showing friendly aircraft positions across the theater. The morning briefing had gone according to plan. 3 close air support missions, routine reconnaissance flights, and a single A-10 Thunderbolt II providing overwatch for a convoy moving through the treacherous Korangal Valley. Viper Base, this is Reaper 27 declaring emergency. The transmission cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Webb's head snapped toward the radio operator, Staff Sergeant Martinez, whose fingers were already dancing across the communications panel. The voice belonged to Captain Zara Cave, call sign Phoenix, a pilot whose reputation preceded her into every briefing room, though not always for reasons she would have preferred. Reaper 27, Viper Base copies emergency. State your situation, Martinez responded, his training overriding the concern creeping into his voice. Through the operations center's reinforced windows, the morning sun cast long shadows across the airfield where ground crews moved between parked aircraft like ants around a disturbed hill. The pause stretched longer than it should have. In the world of military aviation, silence meant trouble. Webb found himself holding his breath, remembering the last time Phoenix had gone quiet during a mission, 6 months ago over Helmand Province, when her A-10 had limped home on one engine after taking heavy ground fire while providing close air support to a pinned-down infantry unit. She'd saved 37 Marines that day, but the after-action report had somehow focused more on her reckless disregard for established engagement protocols than on the lives preserved by her split-second decisions. Viper Base, I've got multiple system failures, hydraulic pressure dropping, and I'm leaking something that's definitely not supposed to be leaking. Phoenix's voice carried the forced calm of a professional aviator, but Webb could hear the underlying tension. He'd been flying combat missions when Phoenix was still in elementary school, and he knew the sound of a pilot fighting for her life 30,000 feet above hostile territory. Martinez leaned forward, pressing his headset closer to his ear. Reaper 27, can you maintain altitude? What's your current position? Grid reference 774921. Angels 15 and descending whether I want to or not. My bird's been better, Viper Base. She's been better. The transmission ended with a burst of static that made everyone in the operations center wince. Outside, the sound of rotor blades began to build as the standby search and rescue helicopter spun up, its crew chief already running through emergency procedures they all hoped wouldn't be necessary. Webb grabbed the radio handset himself. Phoenix, this is Webb, talk to me. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Phoenix's voice came back different this time, steadier, more focused, as if the familiar authority in Webb's tone had given her something solid to anchor herself to. General, good to hear your voice. My starboard engine is making sounds like a garbage disposal eating silverware, and I've got warning lights that are prettier than a Christmas tree. The good news is I'm still airborne. The bad news is physics has some strong opinions about how long that's going to last. Webb found himself almost smiling despite the gravity of the situation. Captain Zara Cave had always possessed an unusual ability to find dark humor in the worst circumstances, a trait that had earned her both fierce loyalty from ground troops and skeptical glances from some of her fellow aviators. Her unconventional approach to aerial combat had saved countless lives over her 3 deployments, but it had also resulted in more aircraft maintenance hours than any other pilot in the squadron. Phoenix, I need you to listen carefully, Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent making life-and-death decisions. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez is monitoring your aircraft systems from here. He's got 30 years of keeping birds in the air, and he's going to walk you through this step by step. Rodriguez, a compact man whose grease-stained hands had coaxed life from dying engines across 4 different conflicts, moved to the communications console. His presence brought an immediate sense of calm to the operations center. If Rodriguez couldn't keep an aircraft flying, it probably wasn't meant to fly. Phoenix, this is Chief Rodriguez. First thing, I need you to tell me exactly what you're seeing on your engine instrumentation panel. Don't give me the pretty version, give me the ugly truth. Through the static, Phoenix's response carried a hint of the gallows humor that had made her legendary among ground forces. Chief, if this instrument panel was a patient, I'd be calling for last rites. Engine temperature is redlining. Oil pressure is somewhere between concerning and catastrophic. And I'm getting vibrations that make me think something important might be trying to leave the aircraft without filing proper paperwork. Rodriguez nodded grimly, his experienced eyes scanning the technical manuals spread across his workstation. He'd seen these symptoms before, usually in aircraft that didn't make it home. But Phoenix wasn't just any pilot, and her A-10 wasn't just any aircraft. The Thunderbolt II had earned its reputation for bringing pilots home under impossible circumstances, and Rodriguez had learned never to underestimate either the machine or the aviators who flew them. "All right, Phoenix, here's what we're going to do," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the confidence of a master craftsman who had spent 3 decades solving problems that existed somewhere between engineering and prayer. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between experience and desperation. Rodriguez guided Phoenix through a systematic shutdown of non-essential systems, redirecting power to keep her damaged engine running just long enough to reach friendly territory. Webb watched the tactical display as the small blue icon representing Phoenix's aircraft crept slowly across the digital landscape. Each mile covered a small victory against the laws of physics and the hostile intentions of gravity. "Viper Base, I'm passing through Angels 10 and still descending," Phoenix reported, her voice tight with concentration. "The starboard engine just made a sound like someone dropping a toolbox down a stairwell. I think it's trying to tell me something important." Martinez looked up from his console, his face pale. "Sir, her rate of descent is increasing. At this rate, she'll be forced to eject before she reaches the valley floor." Webb felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders, the burden of making decisions that would determine whether one of his pilots came home alive or became another name on the memorial wall. He'd sent Phoenix into harm's way that morning, trusting in her skill and her aircraft's legendary durability. Now he had to trust in both again, along with Rodriguez's expertise and a few critical systems that were apparently held together by determination and aviation fuel. "Phoenix, what's your fuel situation?" Webb asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The A-10's twin engines were notoriously thirsty under normal circumstances, and emergency conditions had a way of turning fuel consumption from a concern into a countdown timer. "General, I'm running on fumes and good intentions," Phoenix replied. "Maybe 20 minutes of flight time left, assuming my remaining engine doesn't decide to join its buddy in whatever mechanical afterlife failed aircraft engines go to." Rodriguez was already calculating distances and approach vectors, his fingers flying across a calculator while he cross-referenced charts and technical specifications. The mathematics were unforgiving. Phoenix had enough fuel to reach Viper Base, but only if everything went perfectly from this moment forward. In Rodriguez's experience, things rarely went perfectly, especially when they absolutely needed to. "Phoenix, we're going to get you home," Webb said with conviction he hoped sounded more genuine than it felt. "Chief Rodriguez is working the numbers, and we've got emergency crews standing by. Just keep that bird in the air for another 15 minutes. "Copy that, General. Phoenix is coming home, one way or another." The silence that followed was broken only by the steady hum of electronics and the distant sound of aircraft engines warming up on the flight line. In the operations center, every person present understood they were witnessing something that would either become a textbook example of successful emergency procedures or a cautionary tale about the limits of human determination and mechanical endurance. Through the reinforced windows, the morning sun climbed higher into the desert sky, its harsh light revealing the stark beauty of a landscape that had claimed too many aviators over the years. Webb found himself thinking about Phoenix's personnel file, the commendations for valor, the reprimands for unauthorized deviations from flight plans, the letters from grateful ground commanders whose units had survived, because an A-10 pilot named Zara Cave had been willing to risk everything to provide close air support when regulations suggested caution might be the wiser course. Rodriguez looked up from his calculations, his expression grim but determined. "General, I've got a plan. It's not pretty, and it requires Phoenix to execute a single-engine approach in conditions that would make a test pilot nervous, but it might work." Webb nodded, his decision already made. "Talk to me, Chief." "We're going to have her dump everything non-essential, all remaining ordnance, external fuel tanks, anything that adds weight or drag. Then we'll guide her through a modified approach that uses her remaining engine efficiency to maximize glide ratio. She'll have exactly one chance to get this right, and if she misses the approach, there won't be fuel for a second attempt." The mathematics were brutal in their simplicity. Phoenix had one opportunity to land her damaged aircraft, and failure meant ejection over terrain that would make rescue operations dangerous for everyone involved. Webb had seen too many rescue missions turn into recovery operations, and he wasn't about to lose 2 air crews to save one. "Phoenix, this is Webb. Chief Rodriguez has a plan to get you home, but it's going to require everything you've got left in the tank. Are you ready to copy approach instructions?" The response came back immediately, carrying none of the earlier humor but all of Phoenix's characteristic determination. "General, I've been ready since the day I first climbed into a cockpit. Give me the instructions." Rodriguez began transmitting the complex series of procedures that would either save Phoenix's life or determine the circumstances of her final moments as an aviator. The approach he was describing had never been attempted under these specific conditions, but it represented the best synthesis of aerodynamic principles, mechanical limitations, and human skill that 3 decades of experience could produce. As Phoenix began executing the emergency procedures, Webb found himself remembering why he'd approved her for combat operations, despite the reservations expressed by some of his staff officers. Captain Zara Cave might not have fit the traditional mold of a military aviator, but she possessed something that couldn't be taught in flight school: an instinctive understanding of how to make impossible situations merely improbable through a combination of technical skill and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The radio crackled again. "Viper Base, Phoenix is configured for emergency approach. All non-essential systems secured, external stores jettisoned, and I'm committed to this approach whether my aircraft agrees with the plan or not." Through the operations center windows, the first hint of an approaching aircraft appeared as a small speck against the morning sky, growing larger with each passing second. Phoenix was coming home. The approach began with textbook precision, Phoenix maintaining optimal airspeed and glide path despite flying an aircraft that was shedding parts and leaking fluids across the Afghan countryside. Her remaining engine continued to produce power, though the increasingly erratic temperature readings suggested it was operating well beyond its designed limits. Rodriguez monitored every parameter, calling out corrections and adjustments with the calm authority of someone who had guided countless aviators through similar crises. "Phoenix, you're looking good on approach. Maintain current rate of descent and prepare for landing gear deployment on my mark," Rodriguez transmitted, his eyes never leaving the readouts that told the story of an aircraft and pilot pushing the boundaries of what was mechanically and physically possible. Webb watched through binoculars as Phoenix's A-10 grew larger against the desert horizon, the aircraft's distinctive twin-engine configuration, now asymmetrical as smoke, trailed from the damaged starboard power plant. Even from this distance, he could see that the Thunderbolt II was barely holding together, panels missing, fluid streaming from various locations, and the entire airframe vibrating with the irregular rhythm of an engine operating in its final moments. "Landing gear down and locked," Phoenix reported, her voice tight with concentration. "My remaining engine is making promises I don't think it intends to keep, but we're committed now." The final 60 seconds of any emergency landing stretched like hours, each heartbeat measured against the approaching runway threshold, and the relentless mathematics of descent, rate versus remaining altitude. Phoenix held her aircraft steady despite control inputs that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Her years of training and combat experience distilled into the precise movements required to bring 30 tons of damaged military hardware safely to Earth. The main landing gear touched down with a sound that echoed across the entire base, not the smooth whisper of a normal landing, but the harsh scrape and bounce of an aircraft that was barely under control. Phoenix's A-10 rolled down the runway trailing smoke and sparks, her damaged engine finally surrendering to the inevitable as pieces of metal scattered across the concrete behind her. "Phoenix is on the deck," Martinez announced unnecessarily, as everyone in the operations center could see the emergency vehicles racing toward the now stationary aircraft. Fire trucks, ambulances, and crash recovery teams converged on Phoenix's position with practiced efficiency, their crews ready to handle anything from minor injuries to catastrophic structural failure. Webb grabbed his radio handset one final time. "Phoenix, this is Webb. Outstanding work bringing that bird home. How are you feeling?" The response came back after a pause that stretched just long enough to make everyone worry. "General, I'm feeling like I might need a new pair of flight gloves and possibly a change of underwear, but Phoenix is alive and my bird is on the ground instead of scattered across the countryside. I'd call that a win." The operations center erupted in spontaneous applause, an unusual breach of military protocol that Webb made no effort to discourage. Captain Zara Cave had just accomplished something that would be studied in aviation schools for decades to come, turning what should have been a catastrophic loss of aircraft and aircrew into a textbook example of superior airmanship under impossible conditions. As emergency crews swarmed around Phoenix's aircraft, Webb reflected on the morning's events and their broader implications. The pilot who had been criticized for her unconventional approaches had just demonstrated why combat aviation required individuals willing to push beyond the comfortable boundaries of regulation and procedure when lives hung in the balance. Rodriguez was already examining preliminary damage reports transmitted from the crash recovery team, his experienced eye cataloging the mechanical failures that Phoenix had overcome through skill and determination. "General, this aircraft shouldn't have been able to fly for the last 30 minutes of this mission. The fact that she brought it home says something about both the pilot and the machine." Webb nodded, his mind already turning to the after-action reports and commendation recommendations that would follow this incident. Captain Zara Cave had earned recognition that went far beyond her previous achievements, though he suspected she would be more interested in getting back into another cockpit than in receiving awards for her performance today. Outside, Phoenix was climbing down from her damaged aircraft with the assistance of medical personnel, her flight suit stained with hydraulic fluid and her helmet scarred by debris that had penetrated the cockpit during her emergency approach. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had just survived an experience that would replay in her memory for years to come. "Martinez, get me a direct line to headquarters," Webb ordered. "I want to speak with the wing commander personally about what just happened here today." The young staff sergeant nodded and began establishing the secure communications link that would carry news of Phoenix's successful emergency landing up the chain of command. Within hours, the story would be circulating through military aviation communities worldwide, another chapter in the growing legend of the A-10 Thunderbolt II and the aviators who flew them into harm's way. Webb watched through the windows as Phoenix completed her post-flight medical examination and debriefing with the crash investigation team. Even from this distance, her body language conveyed the mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that followed any successful emergency landing. She had faced the possibility of death that morning and emerged victorious through a combination of training, experience, and the kind of courage that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The afternoon sun was casting longer shadows across Viper Base when Phoenix finally made her way to the operations center for her formal debrief with Webb and the senior staff. Her flight suit had been replaced with a clean uniform, but her hair still showed traces of the morning's ordeal, and her eyes carried the distant look of someone processing an experience that existed at the intersection of terror and triumph. "Captain Cave, please have a seat," Webb said, gesturing toward the conference table where Rodriguez and several other senior NCOs were already assembled. "I think we all have some questions about this morning's activities." Phoenix settled into her chair with the careful movements of someone whose body was beginning to register the physical stress of flying a damaged aircraft under emergency conditions. "General, I'm ready to answer any questions you might have about the mission." Webb opened the preliminary incident report, though the morning's events were already burned into his memory with the clarity that accompanied truly significant moments. "Captain, I want you to walk us through your decision-making process from the moment you first recognized you had a problem until you touched down on our runway. Don't leave out anything, even if it seems minor." What followed was 45 minutes of the most precise and detailed emergency procedures analysis that Webb had heard in his 30-year career. Phoenix methodically described each system failure, every decision point, and all of the factors that had influenced her actions during the crisis. Her account revealed not just technical proficiency, but a depth of aeronautical knowledge and situational awareness that explained how she had been able to accomplish the seemingly impossible. Rodriguez asked increasingly technical questions about engine parameters and flight control responses, building a comprehensive picture of how Phoenix's aircraft had behaved during its final flight. The answers revealed a pilot who had extracted every possible minute of flight time from systems that were operating far beyond their design limitations, using techniques that existed somewhere between formal training and intuitive understanding of aerodynamics. "Captain, one final question," Webb said as the formal debrief wound down. "If you found yourself in identical circumstances tomorrow morning, would you do anything differently?" Phoenix considered the question carefully, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "General, I might have declared my emergency 30 seconds earlier, and I definitely would have requested priority handling from air traffic control sooner in the sequence. But given the same mechanical failures and the same tactical situation, I believe my decisions were appropriate for the circumstances." Webb nodded, satisfied with both her technical analysis and her professional maturity in conducting a self-assessment without defensiveness or false bravado. "Captain, I want you to know that your performance this morning exemplified everything we hope to achieve in combat aviation. You brought yourself and your aircraft home under conditions that would have challenged aviators with twice your experience." The commendation process began that same afternoon, with Webb personally drafting the recommendation for Phoenix's Distinguished Flying Cross, an award that recognized valor and aeronautical achievement under extraordinary circumstances. The citation would eventually describe her actions as extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight, though Webb knew that such formal language could never capture the full significance of what had transpired that morning. As Phoenix left the operations center to begin the mandatory rest period that followed any emergency landing, Webb found himself thinking about the broader implications of her successful recovery. In an era when military aviation was increasingly dominated by technology and standardized procedures, Captain Zara Cave represented something that couldn't be programmed or automated, the human element that transformed routine operations into extraordinary achievements when circumstances demanded nothing less than perfection. Rodriguez approached Webb's desk as the sun began to set over Viper Base, casting the operations center in the golden light that marked the end of another day in a combat zone. "General, I've completed my preliminary analysis of Phoenix's aircraft. The damage is extensive enough that this bird will never fly again, but the fact that it held together long enough to get her home speaks to both exceptional engineering and exceptional piloting." Webb accepted the technical report, though his interest extended beyond mechanical details to the human story that had unfolded that morning. "Chief, in your professional opinion, how many pilots could have accomplished what Captain Cave did today?" Rodriguez paused, his weathered face reflecting decades of experience with both aircraft and the aviators who flew them. "General, I've worked with hundreds of pilots over the years, and I've seen maybe 5 or 6 who possess the combination of technical skill, situational awareness, and pure stubborn determination that Phoenix demonstrated this morning. She's something special." The evening briefing began with Webb's announcement of Phoenix's successful emergency landing, though news of her achievement had already spread throughout the base via the informal communication networks that connected military personnel faster than any official channels. Ground crews who had worked on her aircraft, maintenance personnel who had monitored her emergency approach, and fellow aviators who understood the magnitude of her accomplishment all gathered to hear the formal account of the morning's events. "Ladies and gentlemen, this morning Captain Zara Cave demonstrated why we train for emergency procedures and why we never give up on bringing our people home," Webb began, his voice carrying both pride and respect. "Her actions today will be studied and emulated by military aviators for years to come, and her successful recovery of a critically damaged aircraft under combat conditions exemplifies the highest standards of our profession." The briefing room fell silent as Webb described the sequence of mechanical failures that should have resulted in the loss of both aircraft and aircrew, followed by the methodical problem-solving and superior airmanship that had turned a potential catastrophe into a textbook example of emergency procedures executed under pressure. The audience, experienced military personnel who understood the realities of combat aviation, listened with the appreciation that professionals reserved for truly exceptional performance. As the formal briefing concluded, Webb found himself surrounded by personnel who wanted to discuss various aspects of Phoenix's emergency landing and its implications for future training and procedures. The conversation continued long into the evening, with participants sharing their own experiences with emergency situations and the lessons that could be drawn from Phoenix's successful recovery. Meanwhile, Phoenix herself was sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep that followed extreme physical and emotional stress. Her body was finally processing the adrenaline and cortisol that had sustained her during the crisis, and her subconscious mind was beginning the complex psychological work of integrating the morning's experience into her professional identity as a combat aviator. The story of Phoenix's emergency landing began spreading beyond Viper Base within hours, transmitted through both official channels and the informal networks that connected military personnel across the globe. Fighter pilot forums, aviation safety bulletins, and professional publications would soon carry detailed analyses of her procedures and decisions, turning Captain Zara Cave into a case study in superior airmanship under pressure. But the most significant impact of that morning's events would be felt not in academic discussions or technical publications, but in the changed perceptions of fellow aviators who had witnessed Phoenix transform from a competent, but sometimes controversial pilot into someone whose name would be mentioned alongside the legends of military aviation. The general had reported her bird down, but Phoenix had proven that sometimes the impossible was merely improbable when human skill met mechanical determination at the precise intersection of training and courage. The next morning brought clear skies and the kind of desert sunrise that reminded everyone why some people chose to serve in places where beauty and danger existed in constant tension. Phoenix reported to the flight line early, drawn by the need to see her aircraft in the harsh light of day and to process the reality of what she had survived less than 24 hours earlier. Her A-10 sat surrounded by crash recovery equipment, its battle damage visible in details that had been obscured by smoke and emergency conditions during the previous day's landing. Panels were missing, hydraulic lines had been severed, and the starboard engine showed clear evidence of the catastrophic internal failures that had nearly ended her flying career and her life. Yet the aircraft's fundamental structure remained intact, a testament to both robust engineering and the skill required to bring such a damaged machine home safely. Rodriguez found Phoenix standing beside the aircraft's wing, her expression thoughtful as she examined the extent of damage that had been invisible from the cockpit during her emergency approach. "Morning, Captain. How are you feeling today?" Phoenix turned toward the senior NCO, her face showing none of the previous day's stress, but carrying a new depth of understanding that came from surviving an experience that existed at the extreme edges of human capability. "Chief, I'm feeling grateful. Grateful for the training that prepared me for yesterday, grateful for an aircraft that held together longer than it had any right to, and grateful for a ground crew that talked me through the impossible." Rodriguez nodded, understanding that Phoenix was processing more than mechanical failure and successful recovery. She was integrating an experience that would fundamentally change how she approached every future flight, every risk assessment, and every decision that balanced mission requirements against personal survival. "Captain, you did something yesterday that most aviators will never be asked to do, and you did it perfectly. That says something important about who you are as a pilot and as a person." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Webb, who had come to conduct his own inspection of the damaged aircraft and to check on Phoenix's emotional state following her ordeal. His experience with post-incident trauma told him that the full psychological impact of survival situations often didn't manifest until days or weeks after the immediate crisis had passed. "Phoenix, how are you handling everything?" Webb asked, his tone carrying genuine concern rather than professional obligation. "Yesterday was extraordinary, but today is when the reality of what happened sometimes catches up with people." Phoenix smiled, and for the first time since her emergency landing, the expression reached her eyes with genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. "General, I won't pretend yesterday wasn't the most challenging flight of my career, but I'm ready to get back in the cockpit whenever you need me. This is what we train for, and this is why we're here." Webb felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with military hierarchy and everything to do with witnessing human courage in its purest form. Captain Zara Cave had faced the ultimate test of her profession and emerged not just intact, but stronger and more confident in her abilities. The pilot who had been criticized for unconventional approaches had proven that sometimes unconventional circumstances required exactly the kind of thinking that couldn't be reduced to standard operating procedures. "Captain, I have news that might interest you," Webb said, producing a folder that contained official correspondence from higher headquarters. "Your actions yesterday have attracted attention at the highest levels of command. The wing commander wants to discuss your emergency procedures with the entire squadron, and there's talk of incorporating your techniques into formal training programs." Phoenix accepted the folder with the mixture of pride and humility that characterized professional military personnel, who understood that individual achievements reflected the quality of their entire organization. "General, I hope my experience can help other aviators prepare for similar situations, though I also hope they never have to use what I learned yesterday." The morning briefing began with Webb's announcement that Phoenix would be returning to flight status immediately, pending completion of routine post-incident medical and psychological evaluations. The news was greeted with spontaneous applause from an audience that included pilots, ground crews, and support personnel who had followed her story with the intense interest that military communities reserved for their own. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we witnessed something that will be studied in aviation schools and discussed in ready rooms for decades to come, Webb announced, his voice carrying both professional pride and personal respect. Captain Cave's successful recovery of a critically damaged aircraft under combat conditions represents everything we aspire to achieve as military aviators, and her example will inspire future generations of pilots who face similar challenges. Phoenix stood to address her colleagues, her uniform bearing the same ribbons and insignia she had worn the previous morning, but her bearing now carrying the unmistakable confidence of someone who had faced the ultimate professional test and emerged victorious. Thank you all for your support yesterday and today. What happened was a team effort that involved everyone from Chief Rodriguez talking me through emergency procedures to the crash crews standing by to handle whatever came next. Her brief remarks were followed by detailed technical discussions about emergency procedures, decision-making under pressure, and the importance of thorough training in preparing for situations that existed beyond normal operational parameters. The conversation revealed the depth of professional knowledge and mutual respect that characterized military aviation communities, where individual success reflected collective competence and shared commitment to bringing everyone home safely. As the briefing concluded, Phoenix found herself surrounded by fellow aviators who wanted to discuss various aspects of her emergency landing and the lessons that could be applied to their own flying. The conversations continued informally throughout the day, with participants sharing their own experiences with mechanical failures, emergency procedures, and the psychological challenges of making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Phoenix was no longer the competent but occasionally controversial pilot who pushed boundaries and bent regulations in service of mission success. She had become something more significant, a living example of what was possible when human skill, mechanical reliability, and professional courage converged at the precise moment when all three were absolutely essential for survival. That evening, as the sun set over Viper Base and another day in the combat zone drew to a close, Webb reflected on the broader significance of Phoenix's achievement. In a profession where technical competence was assumed and courage was required, Captain Zara Cave had demonstrated something that transcended both: the ability to transform impossible circumstances into manageable problems through superior airmanship and absolute refusal to accept defeat. The general had reported her bird down, but Phoenix had rewritten that narrative through skill, determination, and the kind of professional excellence that reminded everyone why some people chose to serve in harm's way. Her story would continue to unfold in the missions that followed, but the events of that morning had already secured her place in the pantheon of aviators, whose names were mentioned with respect and admiration wherever military personnel gathered to discuss the intersection of human capability and mechanical possibility. Rodriguez made his final inspection of Phoenix's damaged aircraft as recovery crews prepared to transport the wreckage to maintenance facilities, where it would be thoroughly analyzed for lessons that might prevent future emergencies or improve survival rates when prevention wasn't possible. The A-10 had given everything it had to bring its pilot home, and now it would continue serving by teaching other aviators and maintenance personnel about the margins that existed between routine operations and catastrophic failure. "General, this aircraft has one more story to tell," Rodriguez observed as he completed his examination. "The metallurgy analysis and failure mode studies will provide information that could save lives in future emergencies. Phoenix and her bird are going to keep helping people long after yesterday morning becomes another chapter in aviation history." Webb nodded, understanding that the true measure of Phoenix's achievement extended beyond her personal survival to encompass the knowledge and inspiration that would influence countless other aviators facing similar challenges. Military aviation had always been a profession where individual experiences became collective wisdom, and Phoenix's successful emergency landing would join the canon of stories that prepared future generations for the realities of flying in harm's way. The next morning brought new missions, new challenges, and the relentless operational tempo that characterized military aviation in a combat zone. Phoenix reported to the flight line early, drawn by the familiar routines that had defined her professional life long before her emergency landing, had transformed her from a skilled aviator into a legend whose name would be spoken with respect in ready rooms around the world. Her new aircraft waited on the ramp, fully fueled and armed for another day of providing close air support to ground forces operating in the dangerous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. The A-10 bore no external evidence of the previous day's drama, but Phoenix approached it with the heightened awareness that came from understanding exactly how quickly routine missions could become life-and-death struggles against mechanical failure and the unforgiving laws of physics. The pre-flight inspection took longer than usual, with Phoenix examining each system and component with the thoroughness of someone who had learned to appreciate the critical importance of every hydraulic line, electrical connection, and engine component. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind cataloged details that might have seemed routine before her emergency landing, had demonstrated how quickly routine could become extraordinary. Rodriguez watched from a distance as Phoenix completed her aircraft inspection, noting the increased attention she paid to systems that had failed during her previous flight. "Captain, your bird is in perfect condition today. The maintenance crews went over every inch of this aircraft after hearing about yesterday's excitement." Phoenix smiled, appreciating both the professional competence that kept military aircraft airworthy and the personal concern that motivated extra attention to detail when someone's life had recently depended on mechanical reliability. "Chief, I trust your crews completely, but I hope you understand why I'm being especially thorough this morning." "Captain, if you weren't being thorough after what happened yesterday, I'd be worried about your judgment," Rodriguez replied. "The day we stop learning from experience is the day we start making preventable mistakes." The morning briefing covered routine intelligence updates, weather conditions, and mission assignments that differed little from hundreds of similar briefings that had preceded Phoenix's emergency landing. But the atmosphere in the briefing room had changed subtly, with participants displaying a heightened awareness of the risks inherent in military aviation and a deeper appreciation for the skills required to manage those risks successfully. Phoenix received her assignment with the same professional attention she had always brought to mission planning, but her approach now incorporated lessons learned during 40 minutes of flying a critically damaged aircraft under emergency conditions. Her route planning included additional consideration of emergency landing sites, her fuel calculations included larger safety margins, and her communication procedures reflected the importance of early coordination with ground-based support personnel. "Phoenix, you're cleared for takeoff on runway 27, the tower controller announced, his voice carrying none of the tension that had characterized radio communications during her emergency approach less than 48 hours earlier. "Winds are light and variable, visibility unlimited, and you have priority handling for departure." Phoenix acknowledged the clearance and began her takeoff roll, feeling the familiar acceleration that marked the transition from ground operations to the three-dimensional world of military aviation. Her A-10 lifted off smoothly, climbing through the morning air with the reliable power of twin engines operating within normal parameters and the confident handling that came from aircraft systems functioning exactly as designed. As Viper Base fell away beneath her wings, Phoenix reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a controversial pilot whose unconventional approaches had generated mixed reviews to a respected aviator whose name would be associated with superior airmanship under the most challenging conditions. The transformation had required exactly 40 minutes of emergency procedures executed under pressure, but its implications would influence the remainder of her career and the careers of countless other aviators who would learn from her experience. The radio crackled with routine communications as Phoenix checked in with various air traffic control agencies and began her transit to the mission area, where ground forces were requesting close air support. The voices she heard carried the professional courtesy that characterized military aviation, but Phoenix detected a subtle change in tone that reflected her new status within the community of combat aviators. Reaper 27, this is Overlord. We've got troops in contact at grid reference 784963. They're requesting immediate close air support against enemy positions in a compound approximately 800 meters northwest of their current location. Phoenix acknowledged the mission assignment and began configuring her aircraft for combat operations, her movements flowing with the practiced efficiency that came from hundreds of similar missions flown over multiple deployments. But her approach now incorporated additional layers of situational awareness developed during her recent encounter with mechanical failure and emergency procedures. The mission unfolded according to established protocols, with Phoenix providing precise close air support that eliminated enemy threats while ensuring the safety of friendly forces operating in complex terrain. Her performance exemplified the technical competence and tactical judgment that had characterized her entire career. But observers noted an additional dimension of confidence that came from knowing she had faced the ultimate professional test and emerged successful. As Phoenix returned to Viper Base following mission completion, she found herself looking